on behalf of the chairman of the CSMVS, the trustees, and the Director General, Mr. Sabyasachi Mukherjee, Vikas, I warmly welcome you this evening in our midst. You have been an old friend of mine for almost 3 decades from the time you started your practice, and I'm so delighted that you have done several lectures at the museum, but this one I think is really special because who knew that when we gave the last lecture with you, Vikas, that we would be doing it under these circumstances. But COVID has taught us a lesson that we are resilient and we have kept safe, and we shall certainly go ahead. So Vikas, on behalf of all the participants, a very, very warm welcome to you. It's a lovely topic that you selected, from conversations to conservation, and yourself as an architect. There are a few people here who know you, who are from India. There are some from overseas. So please indulge me for a few minutes while I introduce our speaker to all of you. Dilawari is a practicing conservation architect with over 3 decades of experience exclusively in the conservation field. He did his double masters in conservation from the School of Planning and Architecture from New Delhi and from the University of York. I remember those early days when you embarked on this journey to do your masters at York. What an amazing university and what an amazing experience it must have been. And it has stood you, both these degrees have stood you in very good stead. Vikas has been the head of the Department of Conservation at the Kamla Raheja Institute of Architecture, Mumbai, from its inception in 2007 till August 2014. His practice has successfully executed several conservation projects, ranging from prime landmarks to the unloved buildings of Mumbai. He was instrumental with Intact Mumbai chapter to list the CST station as a World Heritage Site in 2004. Several of his projects have received national and international recognition, and a total of 17 of his projects have won UNESCO Asia Pacific Awards for cultural preservation in Southeast Asia. Congratulations, Vikas, on all the laurels that you have won for yourself, for our city, and our country. A brief synopsis: when we were discussing Vikas's topic, I said it should be a little different. We want to learn something more. What has happened over the years? So he started by telling me when he developed an interest in conservation, it was an emerging discipline in our country. This was in the 1980s. He was fortunate to be amongst the earliest professionals to have done his double masters in this field. The initial years, the 1990s, were more of activism, and hence the term, it was only conversations. But with time, as the discipline started getting recognized due to listing and legislation, the opportunities increased. Initially, the projects were smaller in parts, like a facade restoration or a historic interior. However, with multinational corporations becoming the patrons, followed by Indian corporate houses, the field got a desired impetus. Competition of projects brought in a significant change in the appreciation by people, the general public. This then got widened to larger areas and in different settings. The semi-government and government agencies, owners of the monumental public heritage buildings, also joined in too. By that time, you can bring yourself forward to 2000. And now it is now a well-established discipline with good awareness. However, as funding and focus started growing on grand public buildings, we started losing at an alarming rate the lesser known heritage, the lived in unloved buildings, actually the fiber and grain of our city. In this 3 decades, conservation has never got any official incentive, and on the contrary, the redevelopment, which affects it the most, has got the most of the incentive. I do not wish to stand between Vikas and everyone here this evening. Vikas has given a number of lectures nationally and internationally and has written several papers on this subject. But with the growth of conservation and government funding, the focus also shifted on the beautification. This was conspicuous and quick, and hence requiring minimum intervention. The authenticity, which was the main doctrine, was affected. In contrast to reality, conservation should have ideally focusing on revival of all the lost arts. And I remember when he was doing the BDL, the Bhwadia and the university complex, how they had to train the masons and the pointers and those doing stained glass and those who were grinding shells and all sorts of things. All these arts which were dying out, somehow or the other, they got a huge push and a huge revival, and they were absolutely necessary. And it was at the right time that conservation started here. I do not wish to stand between Vikas and all of you. So very warm welcome, Vikas, on behalf of all of us here today. You've got a very good audience. I see a number of conservation names who've joined us. And I hope those who are not conservationists will convert to the cause. So thank you, Vikas, and I hand you back to Jason and on with the show. Thank you.
Thank you, Firoza. It's really a pleasure to talk about my city and about the efforts which have gone in conserving it. Yeah, as the title states, the journey has been more of initial years were a lot of conversations. And I remember the first time I went to a bureaucrat and I shared my card and I was said, oh, you're a conversation architect. So it's taken 3 decades to be converted from conversation architect to conservation architect. So I just thought it might be an appropriate title to explain and to start the journey. It all started with the coincidence that I was being trained under Ved Sagan, who at that time was handling the Gaiety Theatre in Simla, which was one of the first conservation projects in the country. And if you can see from the images, the Gaiety Theatre on the top left and the right, that's how the theatre was. But just when it was constructed in few decades time, they had to dismantle the top. And because it was unsafe, and then the theater was lying to be restored completely. And Ved Sagan, who restored it, took a very long time to do it, and by that time I was initiated into conservation. Fortunately, there was an academic exercise which happened in our college, which was on Crawford Market, and I have very fond memories of this because this is, I'm talking of 1987. And there was a project given to redesign Crawford Market, and most of them who demolished the markets got good marks. And the person, like I had taken efforts to conserve it, as you can see it from the drawings. And apparently you didn't get good grades, but it tempted me enough to join this as a discipline of masters, which had just been established in Delhi. We were the second batch who got initiated into conservation. And we graduated out with being exposed to urban conservation. And when I just came back, that was 1990s, conservation movement had just started, and we were talking about our cities. UDRI was there, who was Rahul Mehrotra had organized a seminar on Fort Precinct. I was a visiting lecturer, and with the help of my students, you started documenting Fort area. And we were talking, for the first time, we were talking of a larger issues of cities and fort and having it all put in drawings. This helped because there was legislation which was being formed. Sham Chenani was very active. He was the brain behind the legislation. The government was sympathetic, and we were very fortunate that we had a draft regulation in 93, and by 95, we became the first city to have a legislation. Simultaneously, there were various studies which were happening. There was Indian Heritage Society, there was INTAC, there was Save Mumbai Committee. So all these activist groups were there, and we as young conservation architects were helping them in trying to conserve, trying to sell the idea of conserving, or rather creating the awareness for conservation. This was one of the exercises done on the study of DN Road. And as you can see, it's such a fine urban design, which speaks for itself. If you can see, it links Flora Fountain and VT Station, and now you have the metro being added, but just see the fine urban design quality which it has. But the real, by this time, the legislation was in place. We were talking of precincts, we were talking of grade 1, grade 2, grade 3 buildings. And I remember my first break, which was this project, which is one of my most favorite buildings, the Bombay SPCA located in Parel. This is 1991. Indian Heritage Society commissioned me to do a fabric status report. Now, this is prior to the legislation. So there was a report which was prepared. We managed to raise some funding with the help of Mr. Jetta. We covered the roof of this building, which is in a ruinous condition. And what you'll really be surprised, the photograph on the left is of 91, whereas in 2019 is the one on the right. The ruin still stands, failing, to collapse, which is really what the old buildings are all about. They are so good in their construction, and they stand so well, and they've lasted so long. This is a classic example. These were the kind of drawings which were prepared. Every stone which was damaged was marked, surveyed. We wanted to set good standards of conservation, which was just an emerging discipline. And but this project remained unexecuted. I really hope this building sees the, gets conserved, because it's a beautiful building which is crying for attention. The other initial breaks which really happened were thanks to the banks, which became the patrons of conservation. There were many multinational banks which were located in Fort area. This is one of them, the American Express Bank, and it is famous because of this corner building, the Oriental buildings. And I was fortunate that I was helping them with something related to the footpath, where they wanted to improve the footpath. But I got a chance then to go and talk to the CEO, who was John Roski, a German gentleman, and who understood conservation. And together with him, we started exploring things, and we started doing some kind of an archaeology, where all the layers which were unwanted were removed. So if you can see, removing the concrete, we saw the cast iron columns. Removing the bricks, we could see the hidden pillars and pilasters behind. And we went to large heights. Normally, all the banks used to have a ceiling height of 8 to 10 feet, but we went to the large original ceiling heights. And this is all way back in 1995. At that time, computers were not there. So we did some hand-drawn drawings and sketches, and you can see them how it was implemented. This was one of the first projects which really started talking about real conservation. And if you see on the left-hand side, the small banking hall which happens in that corner room had windows on 3 sides. So for the first time, there was no false ceiling which was put, and exposed timber was kept. Very rarely do you see wooden benches and the kind of furniture which is appropriate to a bank. But the American Express Bank gave a free hand to do it, and we could achieve to do a lot at that time. Now, this project plays an important role because it becomes a trendsetter to do the kind of right conservation approach, respecting the authenticity, respecting the architectural character. If you can see the wooden parapet, this was the parapet which was there because the building was modified. It was constructed in 1885 and modified in 1895 by F.W. Stevens. So all that archaeology was visible. This was the external parapet at that time. So we went for a wooden parapet here, which resonated with the overall character of the building. And this became the first project to really kickstart conservation. Then we were fortunate that the Indian corporates, which is Tata Sons, came into the picture. To celebrate 50 years of India's independence, they decided that they will restore one of their buildings, which is the Army Navy building. And this was the first tenanted commercial building to be restored holistically. So it was not just the facade, or it was not just the interiors. We started with everything, the exteriors, the structural repairs to the common areas, the water tank, the roof, and you can see the transformation. Earlier, the air conditioners were all placed on the front facades. So you can see Grindwell Norton used to be on the first floor, and all the air conditioners were there. All these were removed. You can see the flag being unfurled for 15th August. And Indian Airlines, which used to be on the ground floor, vacated that premises, and you had the West Side store which came in. So it's an interesting story that what started as a building, which started as a store, which housed offices, again became a store. There were modifications done. Tata Share Registry used to be located on the basement. The entrance of the building was from the center, so that got shifted, and we created a large space which is used as an amateur art gallery, thanks to the Kalagoda Association and thanks to the Tata Sons who allowed this to happen. And you can see that the facade and the building started being maintained well. In a way, this was a trigger to the entire area gentrification, because the David Sassoon Library, the Elphinstone College then followed it, and the whole concept of art district really started thereafter. And you can see the same building in its present avatar, where it has just been done up and it's been tidied up. And this is how all the buildings should ideally be looked after and maintained. But the real project and the real break really happened with the collaboration of British Council and Mumbai University, where British experts came to train the Indian craftsmen on restoring the lost art of stained glass. And if you can see, Rajabai Tower happens to be one of the finest Gothic revival buildings which we have, standing very tall amongst the entire ensemble. And yes, it was an opportunity because you got a chance to really reintroduce stained glass. I was just back from York, and whatever training which you had learned internationally, the same was being transplanted back to in the Indian context. For the first time, a tubular scaffolding came up, which was really unheard because the British experts used to climb up, and we needed to maintain these standards. Then whatever we have learned in conservation of complete documentation and doing this thing was recorded. Every glass which was broken was recorded, and working methodology of that was prepared. A lot of deliberations used to happen. This project took about 2 years, and I was practically stationed every day at Rajabai Tower handling this, overseeing this whole thing between the British expert and the Indian craftsmen. What we also learned was to use like-to-like materials. Then we have this 6 inches, 6 yards concept, that when you come closer, you can identify the repairs which have been done, but from a longer distance, it goes unnoticed. And this is how the stained glass windows were repaired. And I'm really glad that they've lasted so long still, which is doing very well with the repairs which were done. Of course, they require periodic maintenance and looking after. So this is the shot of the glasses from the inside. And this is interesting that there was a tree which fell down on a balcony and damaged the balcony, and we had to refix it, hardly at any cost, only the mason's cost. And we can see the skilled mason Daudbai who was working on this. So this was the Bombay University story, and from here, actually the focus. It was an unfortunate episode of fire which happened in the Corporation Hall, in 2000 when this whole thing happened. And whenever a fire happens, the damage is more, which is soot related, which is the damage is more because of the water which is poured in, and sudden change of temperatures results in stone to crack. So you can see the balcony, the brackets had collapsed, and you had soot related damage everywhere. Everything, whatever was the original surface had all soot everywhere. A lot of research was done, and this is very important in any conservation project, to get in touch with architectural historians. And I was fortunate that Colin Cunningham, Christopher London, and many others helped. and helping this project to come into the right, in the right manner historically. So these were the color palettes which used to go on, and apparently there was a lot of scrape which was done, and we could then arrive at appropriate solutions. This is just to show you that any project which you do has to speak on craftsmanship, and it was most essential to revive the craftsmanship of stone. And this would be one of the earliest examples where stone was used, where the arch, which was completely damaged, was removed. A new arch was put in, and if you can see on the right hand side, the new arch, and you can hardly differentiate. So revival of craftsmanship is the most important component in conservation, and this is what was achieved in this project, which was an intact project. Intact Mumbai chapter executed it. You can see the damage which was because of the fire, and we tried to retain as much of the original material as we can. These two timber beams which you see has a lot of stainless steel which has been flitched, which is camouflaged inside. But this is how we made it, we retained as much of authenticity as we could. Now, this is how the hall used to look. We had a gray laminate. We had mics, and there were several mics, so there were several wires. And since there were several wires, they took it all from the floor and they carpeted it. So you couldn't see the beautiful Minton tiles. But while we were working on it, we decided that we'll have some hanging mics. So all the, the cables on the floor were removed. So you can now go and appreciate the Minton tiles. The sitting layout was changed, and the furniture was recommended to be wood type of finish, which would complement the hall. Earlier, the whole hall was painted in white color. And if you can realize, if you can see in the photograph, there was not really any contrast to highlight the Victorian richness which was there in the hall. And this gave an opportunity. And as I said to you, every project, which we did initially had a lot of struggle because we had to locate the right craftsmen. So in this project, there was a revival of gilding and the lost art of gilding, which was revived. We had the gilding, which is done with this thing where the original details were highlighted. This is how the hall looks like, and this is one of the most splendid interiors which we have, which is unfortunately not open to public. But what I've gathered now, that there will be conducted walks and people would be able to see this. So this will give you a clue as what Mumbai, in the late 19th century was. The chandeliers were restored by conservators, the stained glass is the one thing which needs to be restored, but the rest of the whole thing was restored. And this is how the hall looks like. So this project gave a lot of confidence. It also helped in change of decision because the municipal corporation themselves were unaware, what rich, in such a rich hall, they were all seated. So that gave a sense of confidence, and that really helped in future projects, because after this project, a heritage cell was established in the municipal corporation of Mumbai. And this became the first semi-government agency to start a conservation department. As I said to you, initially there was a lot of struggle. We had this beautiful building, Aga Khan Palace in Pune. It was declared unsafe because there used to be a girls' hostel, and there was a toilet area which was in a precarious condition. Sorry, I'll just come back. When we did archival research, we realized that it was basically constructed to give employment to the people during famine. It was treated with a blue lime wash, and it was called as a blue palace. So what we really did was we applied a lime wash of a light, greenish blue color, so that we come back to its original and the stone is allowed to breathe. And we restored the unsafe areas, especially the toilets. And if you can see, there are some beautiful staircases and beautiful other areas of the building which have been unused, unfortunately. But while the work was going on, the honorable minister came and he declared this as a youngest public monument. So it is an ASI protected monument, which would be the youngest ASI protected monument which is there. So this is the story, which really was very encouraging, because this was an MTDC sponsored project. and about 70 lakhs was spent to make it, to restore it and to bring it back to its original glory along with external lighting. And I'm so glad that it has happened, and now it is a ASI protected monument. So then thereafter, what happened and what I'm really fortunate is to get very good clients which are sensitive of the needs of conservation. This is the Bairam Ji Jijiboy School, which is one of my earliest project, and I still continue to be its maintenance or a maintenance architect or a architect, this thing. I think it's 25 to 30 years I've been associated with this building. And if you can see, we have restored it in phases as and when the money was available, and normally in a span of 10 years. When you work on a school, it's only possible to repair a school during holidays. So that's maximum work used to happen at that time. It's a building designed by Khan Marsban Khan, and it's one of the, it's a very solid in construction. It's a beautiful building facing Cherney Road, the Queen's Road. It used to have a statue of Athena on the top, but in the last 30 years, there used to be a 501 hoarding. So it was more known to be as a 501 hoarding building, but that hoarding was removed long back. And we decided to restore and put the Athena back. And this was a very complicated procedure and a detailing to be done, which we managed to do it. We've been working with very limited funds, but you can see the transformation which happens, which, small things like right color schemes, putting the stained glass back, exposing the wood, polishing the wood, removing the false ceilings. So things like that. And hats off to the trustees who look after this building so well. Yes, there were many structural repairs also which are required, because when the building becomes old and if it's not looked after well, so these are the structural repairs, minimum intervention, whatever is required, maximum retention of original fabric. And this is the interiors of the school, although it looks, very robust Gothic revival from outside, but interior has a very delicate woodwork with small courtyards. It's worth a visit if you have not visited. And these are some hidden jewels of the city which are there. Then a very interesting and break which came and which was very challenging structurally. Now you have to put all this into the context of time. And we are talking of 2002, when conservation is just getting established, and you have this building which was leaning out in both directions, vertical in X plane and Y plane, by 1 feet out. We were very unsure whether it could be made really stable, but if you see the interiors, there were wide cracks, and the walls were leaning out. So we had to hold the walls. So with the help of Mr. Kamal Hatkar from Sterling Engineering, we managed to hold these walls back with help of turnbuckles. The external plaster was removed, which was a cementous plaster, and we then restored it using shell lime. You can see the process. The shells were also used for the windows. And one unique thing of work in Goa is the stencil painting. So that also was revived. Apparently it was a huge building, 40,000 square feet, and we didn't have that large fund. So the project went on for a long time. We could manage just to do the interiors of the chapel, and you can see the false ceiling put back, and you can see the turnbuckles which are inconspicuous. The rest of the area was repaired and consolidated, but after me, someone has converted it into a museum of modern art, which is excellent. Unfortunately, the false ceiling could not go back, but nevertheless, at least it's been put into use and it's generating funds and revenue. So it was a real good thing. And if you can see, what we've tried to improve is to provide few vents onto the windows, keep the lean and the inclination, not trying to correct it, and doing a lime wash to the building. The major break which then really happened was VT station, or the CSMT now. The railways got in touch with Intact Mumbai chapter, and for the first time, a non-ASI monument was selected to be nominated, and we were fortunate that it could get the nomination. And if you really see, it is one of the finest examples of Gothic revival building. The other building would be the Palace of Westminster. But what was very important at that time was to identify a larger cluster of Gothic revival buildings in case if a cluster nomination happens. So what we are really talking is this is 2003, where the whole Bartle Frere scheme, which was proposed, which stretches from Crawford Market right up to Gateway of India. And if you can see, all the buildings in the brown are the Gothic revival buildings or the public buildings which were constructed endorsing the Gothic revival style. Very interestingly, only this portion on the right hand side gets selected as World Heritage Site now, but the major block which is on the left hand side has gone unnoticed. I hope the cluster nomination can be increased and we can get a larger ensemble, because this is what really constitutes the Bartle Frere's plan for the city restructuring, and in which VT Station played an important role. Now, till here, it was all going smooth, and very interestingly, the government started getting interested in conservation. So we were approached to restore this beautiful building. It doesn't look so beautiful on the left-hand side because it was the ONGC headquarters in Patiala House in Dehradun. And they decided that they'll convert it into an oil museum to celebrate 50 years of their existence. You can see the building converted on the right-hand side. It's in fine Art Deco buildings, 1930s. And if you can see and how insensitive we are, and actually the conservation job is to correct the insensitivity which has been done in the past. If you see the top left, we started removing layers of the lift block, the covered verandas, and what we really got is what you see on the right on the top. You can see the whole process. Now this is how the building was restored back. We try to highlight the Art Deco details which are there. Since it has been converted into a museum, there's a lot of artifacts and there are a lot of displays. Some of this affects the Art Deco the details, but then that's where the compromises do happen and we have to do it. But we try to restore it to its original detail, and I should tell you that it was quite an experience, because you got a contracting agency who was not expert in conservation, somewhere from different parts of the country, and you had to execute this. It's very difficult to execute government projects, especially conservation. But this is how then the building gets converted, and it's now an oil museum called the Subir Raha Oil Museum. Something which is very close to my heart and which I really enjoyed doing this, which dates back to 2006, is this building which is called Hirabag, which is located in the Buleshwar, right at CP Tank, overlooking CP Tank. And if you see, this is how the facade was. It had some pointed arches. It had a mixed style. The exterior was with Gothic traces, but the interior was very Indian, if you can see from what you see on the left hand side and on the right, this thing, with a courtyard. And what is amazing was this courtyard. Once you entered this courtyard, you could conduct an open air class without the noise being disturbed. Frankly speaking, this is one of the finest buildings which I've ever come across, which respects urban design. It actually activates all your five senses: the breeze, the touch, the texture, sound. It is a fine building. For those who have not seen and visited this building, I seriously advocate one should see this building. Now, while we were working on it, it was quite a chance that the painter said that while scraping, we are seeing some things which are emerging out. When we saw it and when we conjectured it, it was these initials of HB. But unfortunately, someone had painted over it. So as I said to you, a job of a conservation architect is to basically correct the insensitive interventions of the past. So we managed to restore it back. And this whole hall, we tried a lot of experimentations to do what is appropriate and which will be suitable. We practically went to do one room with Araish plaster as how it used to be. Now, it's unfortunate that there was no large fundings to do it, so we just did one trial room. What is interesting is how the ancient wisdom was. If you really look back into this building, there were shops on the ground floor which were supposed to subsidize the dharamsala activities on the top, and people could come and stay. But unfortunately, due to the Rent Control Act, the shops were not giving rent, and the building became into the situation in which it is. So it had to do things which made it self-sustainable. So you can see the lot of experimentations which were done with the flooring, with the color schemes, with the lime wash, with the stencil. And this is how conservation can bring the transformation. So imagine the building on gray. This is how most of our buildings are in heart of Buleshwar, Girgaon and other things. But if you restore it well, you can bring the grandeur. What I'm really surprised is many shoots of Bollywood movies, advertisements now happens in this building. This hall is used and it is fetching revenues for it to be looked after. This is what is the success story in any conservation. As I said to you, it's one of the finest buildings. For those who've not seen, should have a visit and have a look into this. So this is about Hirabag and how conservation has happened to help in sustaining it and to look after it, and is serving the purpose. Then a phrase which normally comes is adaptive reuse. This is Gyan Prava and Queen's Mansion. This was a premises which was something like that. There were, offices which were there, and we had to convert it. Rashmi Podar got in touch, and it had to be converted into a multi-purpose hall. And seeing the acoustics, seeing the other reasons, we decided to expose the bricks. We had the stained glass windows on the outside restored, and we created extra shutters inside so that the ambient lighting can be maintained, and when required, even the louvers can be used for ventilation. Of course, it's an air-conditioned space. There was a choke which was a small internal choke, so we decided to cover it with fixed glass. Of course, some Art Deco elements have been used to create that ambience. It's just an example of adaptive reuse, that if everyone starts converting and using the area into a productive manner, you need not pull down then the buildings. So with this, what was really happening is we started getting institutions who started getting interested in conservation. The awareness was spreading. The YWCA, the YMCA, they all owned historic buildings and they got in touch. So we restored this building, which is called the Lady Wellington Hostel, which is located on Madam Kama Road. And this is how it was refurbished. And after 10 years, we've again been involved in its refurbishment, which has just been completed. And you can see the refurbished building. So if we look after our buildings, our city is such a fine city, and one can be really proud of if all the buildings have been maintained so well. So you can see the transformation, you can see the interiors. Now, this was a very challenging project, so which again is a Tata Sun project, Evert Investments. It's a beautiful corner building, but if you can see the right-hand side top roof had an AC sheet roof. It was not the original roof because there was a fire which had happened in 1985, which had destroyed the top floor. So there was a temporary roof which was put, and it's one of the finest Venetian Gothic buildings which we have. And when you work on a building which has no open space, parking, and a very busy road front, it becomes very difficult. And we had to erect a complete roof to match with the original one, put the boardings back, and to restore it without any open spaces. So this all requires a lot of hard work, coordination, working, and logistics to make it all work. This is how it has been restored. This is how the internal areas, the toilets and the chalk was. For those who visited now, you can see the transformation, but this is where 2 years I had to spend to restore it. So conservation is not just the restoration of glamorous facades, but it also requires doing these kind of details and trying to make the same courtyard functional and better. So the interiors of the choke and the courtyard, which is what is restored. Yeah. Now, this is a project which really took 10 years for it to be completed because there was no funding available. This was the house of Jamshedji Tata. And this is the Esplanade House. This is the archival photo, one of the most opulent buildings of its time. Amongst the other buildings, which would be a public building, would be Bhaudaji Lad, and amongst the residential building, this would be the most opulent building of its time. One of the few buildings in Fort area which had open spaces since 3 plots were amalgamated together. And this is how the condition was thanks to the Rent Control Act. It was completely in a very poorly maintained condition. And this is what gives you an indication that the original building was this much. It was added by a floor in 1938. And that's where a lot of things went wrong because it was a timber design building on which heavy RCC was put. It required extensive repairs, but funds were very limited. So what happened is Siba Gaiki, who were located on the ground floor, vacated because of the rent control. With the people with the turnover of more than a crore had to pay the market rent. So the ground floor got vacated, and you had the RK Swami BBDO, which came in. When they started paying a good amount of lease rent, that same money was plowed back to the building. And you can see we've used like-to-like materials, try to restore all the original details of the building back. It's a building which has very intricate awnings with gutters, inbuilt gutters. All these details were completely respected, and this is the interiors inside. Very high, high quality interiors with gold gilding and other decorations of POP and other things. This is the staircase. A lot of artwork of this, which used to adorn this, is now in the Prince of Wales Museum, in the 2 galleries which are there on the 2nd floor. And this is how the building was restored. You'll be surprised that in 10 years' time, we could spend only 2.75 crores, which is peanuts to such a large building. And if all buildings, if government gives incentives to such all buildings, then we can conserve many of these things. This is just to show you the some photographs which have been clicked few years ago. This is another project which makes me quite happy because what you've done is not really known, and the best compliment a restorer or a person can get is, what have you done? So in this, it is an Art Deco building. We wanted to highlight the Art Deco details, so we've added the grills. We've added some furniture which is complementary to that era and to that space, and it goes quite unnoticed and blends well. So this is a small project which I thought I should share because that speaks. If you do things appropriately, it really highlights the space. Now, this is where the focus now shifts on to the unloved buildings of Mumbai, which unfortunately are being pulled down at a very fast rate. Many of them are not protected. If they are cess properties, it's more easier to demolish them. This is the Lal Chimney Complex in Mumbai Central, which is belonging to the Garib Zoroastrian Renthan Fund. And these are the buildings which were there. Now, apparently this building was structurally in a very dilapidated condition. They had the option, they could pull it down and they could have gone for a high rise as what is there behind, but they didn't opt for that. I was given a free hand, and we decided to really repair it and restore it wherever we can. So the shell was quite intact, and we put new floors. The RCC slab, we retained whatever we could, the steel joists, so as to make it economical. The details which were missing, we wanted to introduce it back. I should be honest, we've used cement, we've not used lime, because here the question was of really bringing the richness of the building, the on the facades and things like that. The material authenticity and other things could follow later on, but to convince people that this is how the rich facade is. If you realize this box window had to be altered because the person agreed to respect this detail. Again, whatever you learned of conservation, minimum interventions, so you don't change the entire post, you just change whatever is locally damaged. And with that, you can transform this buildings. Now, most of our buildings are so neglected, but all of them have the potential to come back to the same thing. The rents are very meager. They range between, 1 rupee a square feet. So, and these are small flats with toilets which have been attached. So they are not like chawls that way. So all these buildings have now been restored and people feel happy to be in them. And if you can see earlier, when I went to photograph this building, I was shooed away, but now it's a photographer's delight to shoot some of these details. So this is the whole colony as how it looks like. There were 5 buildings. We restored 1 building completely inside outside. The other buildings where we could only do common areas and some things where we only could do the exteriors. But what's interesting is this statistics which emerges out. If you restore a building completely, like what you've done on the right-hand side, Bhwadia building, it costed 863 rupees. That's way back in 2012. If I restored the one on the bottom right is Dada Chanji building, where we did some of the toilets, some of the common areas. It costed 414. If we just did the exteriors, it's just 179 rupees a square feet. And Cooper building is similar to Dada Shanji building, which is 505. So it doesn't cost too high to restore buildings authentically. The repair board or cess has a fund or a capping of 200 rupees a square feet. So that doesn't allow you to do the structural changes. So if you really want to do structural changes using like-to-like materials, then this is the kind of cost which one has to spend. As compared to 2,500 and 3,000 rupees, which goes in redevelopment, and you disrupt the people, the social harmony is disrupted, and you'll have, more load onto the infrastructure. So it's really essential that conservation should also be encouraged in areas where the buildings have their life and can be conserved. Now, dealing again, a few government projects which you dabbled with, but not very comfortable. This is the Institute of Science, a building designed by George Pettit, and it's a paradise to be inside. It's a small botanical garden in the courtyard and a library which is very quiet. And these are some of the photographs of the courtyard as how they were before and how they've been restored. We've tried our best to do it, but it's very difficult to work when you have a user department which is separate and the client, which is PWD, which is separate. And if you can see, this is the interiors. It was just painted in one color, but we wanted to highlight and bring the richness of the interior spaces, but we had limitations. We could not do it as what we've done it in Bhwadia Yacht or any other projects. I've not shown Bhwadia Yacht because most of you all know about it, so I've skipped that. This is just to show how grand some spaces are there in Mumbai and some of our public buildings. Just see these interiors, and these are comparable to any of the libraries internationally. If you go to Edinburgh or if you go to other places with rich woodwork and the double height spaces. Then we come to, interestingly, to other buildings, which this is how conservation movement is spreading. The Royal Bombay Yacht Club gets in touch and wants to restore its building. There's been earlier repairs which have been carried out, but after 10 years, it requires a relook. So this is one of the buildings which we got a chance to work in 2011 and 12. And we wanted to respect the historic interiors, with the kind of color scheme which would be appropriate. So these were some trial and errors which were done. This flooring was damaged because they constructed an underground drainage facility. So the original Minton tiles were removed from here. So we got a chance to put them back, matching to the original. And this really brings the highlight and the original, details of the club. Uh, just treating the in appropriate color schemes and highlighting the architectural fenestration brings the whole project out. So this is what has been attempted. I'm sure most of you all have visited this and seen it for yourself. There's another building which is equally great and splendid, which is the Jane Pettit Library on DN Road. And if you see, this is how the interior was. It was a building which was added and extended in 1930s with an uninterrupted space using a lot of concrete with RCC columns and beams. And this was a task to restore it. Uh, there was corrosions in the slab. There was waterproofing, which needed to be attended. So this is how the condition was, and this is how the exterior was. Didn't require much of intervention except that just required cleaning and applying lime wash in certain areas and highlighting the ironwork which was there. But the rear facade had a very shallow balcony, but it was facing the west side, and you required to cordon off the rains which were damaging the stone, which were damaging the doors, and also was making the inner reading area not very comfortable. So these screens were originally there, and we found it in the old traces of the drawings. So we've reintroduced that back, and we've done the interiors with the appropriate color scheme, and with better lighting, fans, and it's a all the it gives a comfort level to the people who use this, and most people really like this, which is the refurbished space. Now, apparently, there was a new stained glass window which was added. You had an opportunity to add a new stained glass window, so you can see on your right hand side. And the original details were just highlighted with help of gold highlights, gold gilding, not real gilding, but gold paint highlights. The interiors have been treated with colored glass so that direct glare doesn't come in, and this is what adds on to the historic interiors. Now, we are now practically in 2015 onwards, which is the last 5 years where a lot of public-private partnership happens. And this is a project which was a Kalagoda sponsored project, the BH Bhwadia clock tower, as it is known. And apparently this was in a structurally very dilapidated condition. It was not very sound in construction because all these stones are very thin stones which have been joined, just resting one over the another by gravity. Really no locking system. And once you have vegetation growth which starts in, this was crumbling and this could have fallen down at any stage. The interiors also was in very precarious condition. Many of these joists were badly affected. It is a BMC owned property, and BMC had an agreement with Kalagoda, and Kalagoda restored it and is looking after its maintenance. So this is how we could manage to restore it back to its original glory. The clock is functional. There was a lot of earth fill which was removed. And once we removed the earth fill, we found the niches where the lamps, traditional lamps were lit. And you can see it's now, you have a clock tower with 4 lights focusing on it. Just to give a reference, this is prior to what VT station, before VT station. So this clock really helped and help in giving, orientation of time and as being treated as a landmark. Another very interesting project just before we were doing Flora Fountain was the Mooji Jetta Fountain, which again is a Kalagoda sponsored project. This is how the original archival sketch of Stevens was, where the water used to come in and people used to drink it from these spouts, and you had a drinking trough for the animals. And if you really went and saw that, you had some alien material, sandstone, which red agra, stainless steel railing, and then instead of water coming in, you had a peepal tree which was there. And this is how the condition was. When we started working on it, we decided to restore it. We never knew that we would be able to restore the water system also. but it was a challenge to restore the water system. And this gave us a lot of confidence then to restore the water system of Flora Fountain. This is again, if you can see, there was, for the last 4 or 5 decades, no, this fountain never had worked, but it was made functional. And I was practically very happy to see, because the kind of water which comes in is the same as what you saw in the original sketch of F.W. Stevens. Now, something which is, slightly closer to my heart are building like these, which are on, normal streets, Meadow Street. This is how the building was on the left-hand side, as you can see, a non-discrete building. But once you give it a proper treatment, it enhances the life, it improves the property value, and it helps in gentrifying the surroundings also. So hopefully these kind of buildings, if conservation is endorsed, we can have more better environment rather than go for high rises and car parks and other things which are completely unwanted. It's nearly coming to an end. This is just a recent project which we've done. It's the Dargah, which is Mahajini Dargah. A very interesting building with a very unique dome. It's only about 100 years old, 1908. Very interesting details made up of Porbandar stone and a brick dome. But unfortunately, the interior was plastered in cement. It had some kind of graniting. I don't know why the graniting was there, because basically it was a brick dome. It never had a China mosaic, but this China mosaic has lasted so well, and it was there for last 50 years. So we decided to, put back the same kind of tiles back. We could have gone back to lime plaster and things like that, but the maintenance has to, one has to think of the maintenance and has to be practical. This is the interiors. They had colored glass, but these glass used to break because the wind pressure and due to other things. So this is the interiors of that space. You can see the condition of the windows, which were basically fixed windows. Now this is how, and it's a privately owned dargah, in the sense it belongs to a family and who looks after it. And this is how we managed to restore it. This is how the colored glasses have been changed with leaded light color, with leaded light glass. We've deliberately chosen white glass because the sunset changes the hue of this color. The blue symbolizes the sea, and the green symbolizes the religion. So very delicately, just touches of that. And you can see, people offering their prayers and respecting the sun setting on the western side. And this space has been appreciated by the people who go to worship there. It's one of the most tranquil sites in Mumbai. For those who've not visited, should have a look. And apparently this is just the last thing, just to celebrate the Swachh Bharat mission. SBI had sponsored a project which Intact Mumbai chapter was awarded. And there was an exercise done to map and to do the kind of works which are required to some facades which were left out. But we managed only to give a report. The railways have carried out the works themselves. This is just a survey which was done. And you can see the difference which it can bring. I wish we could have supervised it and be associated with it in a much holistic manner, but that was the limitation at that point. Yeah, this would be the last thing. I'm so happy that what started as conversations has reached to conservation, where everyone has a habit of enclosing verandas. So if you really see, this is Bazaar Gate Police Station, where every veranda was covered up. There were toilets which were located here. There were, working desks and kiosks which were there. And this is how, with the help of Kala Goda, we managed to restore this. We just did the exterior facade and we've done the veranda area. And then we landed up doing some extra common areas. But I'm so glad that now conservation has been accepted, and there are departments, semi-government, government offices who want their building to be restored. So this would be one of the last slides. And what I really want to leave things for discussion or for question answer is the following things. Change is an inevitable part of nature. Now, we do not have a problem when it is need-based change, like if a person wants to add a floor or modify a few things. But it's only when the greed-based change comes in, that's where the conflict starts. And unfortunately, our bylaws do not capture the need-based criteria. Now, this is where conservation becomes conservation versus development rather than conservation and development. And something which I strongly believe is that can today's architecture be tomorrow's heritage? Now, if it can't, it's a good reason why conservation should be encouraged. Why should you pull down something if you can't give something worthy, which will be heritage of tomorrow? Just to debate around, the fort walls of fort area was demolished, but we got the public buildings, we got the entire ensemble of these public buildings and DN Road and other things, which is the heritage of today. So that benefited the city, it benefited things which were good, and it is worthy of heritage. But if you're pulling down something now, are you giving it which will become like heritage of tomorrow is a question. Then something which is very important is conservation economics and sustainability. Now that's something which is completely missing in our country. We talk of legislation, but legislation is without incentive. So when you have lived in heritage, now if you have historic areas which are self-sustaining, in Kochi, Fort Kochi or Mattancherry, where the tourism is a driving factor, no one will pull down these kind of houses. So this is something which we really have to talk about it. Given chance and opportunity to conservation to prove that conservation economics can work, which is something which is very important. Then conservation should be craft-based and with patronage, but unfortunately it's now becoming a contractor-driven movement with overtones towards beautification and as a result compromising on authenticity. So this is, when I started my careers, I was dealing with craftsmen, whether it was stained glass artists, mine masons, gilding guys, but now it's all being corporatized. And, the whole approach towards conservation is now different. So the end results are different. Then the city should be a lab for urban renewal. What's happening is we find that redevelopment is only considered to be the mantra. We don't have any additions, alterations. Of course, redevelopment is a component, but conservation also should be allowed within that. So the focus should shift to urban renewal rather than redevelopment. Then what I really have concluded in the last 30 years is that we are the finest city in the world if we can recognize the essence and qualities of past and integrate it with present for a better tomorrow. Thank you.